Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis le remplaçant de Aneil aujourd'hui. That's French for hi everyone. I'm replacing Aneil today.
Yeah, hello everybody. We have Jack Moore filling in for Aneil on the Shift Gear podcast. Aneil is still he's in transit right now on a plane coming back from the Big Island. So I got one of Canada's young stars here, Jack Moore, to fill in with me. So Jack, thank you so much for coming on the Shift Gear. Why don't you give a quick introduction to everyone listening?
Yeah, no problem. I'm Jack. I'm from Canada, Ottawa, Ontario specifically, our nation's capital. I've been playing competitive for about 6 or 7 years now. I've been a master since 2019, and this year in Hawaii was my fourth Worlds invite, fourth competitive season.
Nice. Yeah, so Jack did really well at Worlds this year. He just bubbled top 32 with Regie Drago. And I know he's put a lot of work into the deck, so he's going to really break it down for us today. I feel like lots of people are interested in playing Regie Drago, so I'm really happy to have you on. But Jack, just before we get into that, why don't we let the audience get to know you a bit better? So why don't you tell me? Let's start off with what's your favorite deck that you've ever played in Pokemon?
So I'd say my favorite deck I ever played, it'd be a toss-up. I loved Malamar for 2019 World, the classic with spell tags, Giratina Garchomp, no consistency engine. It was a bit of a pile, but it was a favorite of mine. If not, I would have to say Lost Box.
Okay.
I loved, especially last year at Worlds when you get to play Kyogre. The format felt so clean for it. You got the best of both worlds with that deck, and it was so like rewarding to hit those big plays at the end of the game, and nothing has been able to capture that feeling since.
Yeah, Kyogre's one of the coolest cards ever. I feel like I remember I played at a League Cup once, and I did the combo and someone who was a new player, and he was like, "This is the coolest thing ever." I'm not even upset that I lost. So that's awesome. And then yeah, building off that, what's your favorite format you've ever played?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Honestly, it might have to be Worlds last year. I think Worlds last year got it right. We had a good mix of aggro decks, or even slower stuff. Like I know Kyogre was big that year, but like Miraidon on the other side of the bracket showed up and like was such a fast deck, such an innovative concept, or like CPAL showing up that tournament. Just like a great mix. Everything felt pretty balanced.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that format too. I'd say probably better than this year's Worlds for sure. Yeah, so before we get into World Jack, I kind of just want to talk about your journey as a player. So I have your Limitless page open here, and you've had a great past two seasons. You've had 9 day 2s across the past 2 seasons. So you said this was your fourth Worlds. I think it's fair to say you've probably been a lot more successful the past couple seasons. You've made top 8 at regionals. You've been contending for top 32 at Worlds. Can you kind of maybe tell the listeners how your journey as a player went and what you think has contributed to you becoming more successful?
100%. So my first Worlds was back in 2019, Washington. I was a senior that year, and I think I only made it to 2 or 3 regionals, and none of them were. I think I bubbled into top 16 one time, but nothing was super remarkable. I was just playing cards. I don't think there was any mind or strategic decision making behind that. I just showed up at Worlds, and Worlds went not great, like a 3-3 drop. And so I played in the Open as master. Uh, I'll be honest, I was lucky to do as well as I did. I got top 32 there. And so that meant in my mind that I could keep playing as a master. I could actually compete with these people who I thought were untouchable at the time. And so didn't make any day 2s, but I won a bunch of cups as master. In the season, I got interrupted by COVID, which was London Worlds. And then London Worlds resumed. I get my invite at NAIC that year. It was a lot harder to close out because we had no cups, and I wasn't quite at the level to be reliably day 2ing regionals. So it was a bit of a last minute invite, but I got there. London Worlds, I lost the win in that year. It was a lot closer than I ever got, in Washington. And that summer, I really spent a lot of time testing. And I think Worlds is where I get the best, because I have so much uninterrupted time to just obsess over the game and just refine gameplay. And I think that's been my biggest mark of improvement every year is I maybe get a little bit better over the season, but at Worlds that whole summer I have the time to grind. And so following London, I was able to make some day 2s, and even a top 8. And then Japan, that Worlds, I can actually day 2. I just miss out on top 32. And then the next season, I can do the same thing. And this year, I was able to day 2 again and felt like I could more reliably day 2 rather than kind of fluke into it.
Yeah, nice. I think like for me especially, and just a lot of people I talk to, I think when you age up, like it's a very like nerve wracking thing because you're kind of like, okay, like I had success, you're kind of nervous, you can't carry it over, and I think you always just need that one first day two or big result, and then you're like, all right, I belong here. Um, so that's great to hear that you've been able to like refine your process and just get better through that. So and maybe why don't you like kind of explain like when you do this grinding in the summer for like worlds, for example, like what goes into that practice? Because basically 3 day two or 2 day twos plus a win and miss, that's like a fantastic track record. I think honestly, like most people like struggle to even get through day one of Worlds. So, what specifically do you do during that process that you think has been like so effective for you personally?
So I think the big thing is just figuring out, NAIC happens right before Worlds. That's the last bit of info you're going to get. Sometimes a new set breaks it up, but the sets this year was pretty impactful, but it isn't like a complete paradigm shift usually. And so honestly, what I just do is I just build every single deck, and I often just test by myself. I'll just play both sides, and so I'll have 10 proxy decks sitting around on my desk, and I just play every deck against every other deck, and then eventually one deck emerges, and if I can recognize, hey, that deck's the play, then I just lock in on that one deck. Like for 2 years ago, Worlds with Palkia, I locked in on that. This past year was Lost Box, and Hawaii this year was Drago. And for each of those decks, I just once I pick that deck about a few weeks out, I just grinded every single matchup consistently. And when you play both sides, not only do you figure out how your deck works, you get an understanding for what your opponent's deck is trying to do. So, like I played against a lot of Lugia this year in my testing, and by the end of that matchup, I knew exactly what lines Lugia had to take every single time, and I could completely understand how to beat that deck specifically in like a way that if you were to play in the ladder, you wouldn't really appreciate.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. Like I think I'm always a huge advocate of like testing on your own. Because I think like what you're doing is you're basically coming up with what you think the matchup spreads are on your own. Because a lot of times like I'll look at like Limitless or Trainer Hill will have like that website where like they have like the matchup spread from like Limitless tournaments and you can filter it. And like I just go, I'm like, this just doesn't feel right to me, right? I think when you're trying to come up with a play for the tournament, like you need to yourself figure out what the matchups are. And when you go to a tournament like Worlds, I think like the skill level is so high that you have to assume that your opponents are going to be well practiced, know the lines and all that. So when you're playing the decks against each other, are you kind of like keeping track of like what the win rate is and like kind of having like a spreadsheet or something of being like, okay, like Drago's like 60-40 against this deck, maybe like 45-55 against this one, that type of thing?
Yeah, pretty much. It's more of like a mental thing. Like I can tell, like let's say, usually what I'll do is like first day of the week, let's say it's Monday. All right, Monday is just Regie Drago versus Guardy Day, and I'll only play that matchup. And just by the end of the day, I'll see, all right, who won more games? Cool, this is what I think that matchup. A problem I had early on, my first year when I did it as a senior, I had this method, but I had a deck I wanted to play, and I just didn't know how to play the other decks well. So the data was so skewed that like I was like, oh my god, Malamar was winning like 90% of these games, guys. It's cracked. I don't know how I'm gonna lose this year's Worlds. And obviously that didn't happen. Um, and so I think a big part of the process is just being able to like, all right, this was like a mistaken data, so I need to exclude it. So just being able to filter out your bad data, in addition to like you look at other people's matchup results, and you could say, okay, yeah, this is accurate data, or like this is skewed because online people don't know how to play like Regidrago, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like I remember I used to always look at like Chen Pao's win rate, and I'm like, how are people like losing this matchup or something? And I'm like, same with Drago, because I think the deck is a little bit complicated, right? So okay, cool. So like, do you have like a testing group too, or people you bounce ideas off of, or do you rely mainly on just like playing by yourself and like you just trust your play to come to these conclusions?
Yeah, so I've had people over time. I don't have a dedicated group that I work with every time, but like I for sure have some people. I got to shout out Nathan Ginsburg recently out of San Diego. I've been working with for a bit. We played the same deck at LA Regional this year to better results for one of us than the others. But no, it depends. I didn't same 60 with anyone this year. I couldn't convince anyone else to play Drago. So like ultimately these ideas are like I have to be the final check for my own ideas at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Because I feel like yeah, even if you like have people to bounce ideas off, which is great. Like sometimes you just like disagree or you come to different
Yeah.
conclusions and all that. And I will honestly say, like, this sounds surprising to say out loud. Like, I feel like a lot of people at Worlds, like, they don't even like practice like as hard as they could be, right? So like, if you're putting in that time, like, you understand every single line. Like, even at Worlds, I play against people sometimes. I'm like, okay, they're just like missing lines, or like they don't understand. Like, at least in my opinion, like the like optimal way to play a matchup. So, I honestly think same for stuff like, especially these tournaments like regionals. I think if you're willing to like grind, like I think you can have like such a huge advantage, like just over like a majority of the player base. So I mean, I think it just shows with you, right? Like that the dedication's really been paying off, and like I feel it's like one of these worlds, like you're just gonna like break through, like things are just gonna go your way because you're basically just knocking on the door there, right? So okay, one more thing before we hop into actually talking about worlds here. You made top 8, your very first top 8 as a master with a Morepeko Miltank control deck back in Baltimore a couple years ago. So I think that kind of shows your capability as a deck builder. So can you maybe like describe to me like how you kind of came up with a deck like that, like a rogue deck that like wasn't really an archetype, and I don't think people played it after either, but that was a very unique deck to yourself.
Yeah, so I think there's a bit of context required to this deck. It basically at NAIC, Alex Koch played this deck and went 5-2-2 with it. And it was, I thought it was a really cool deck when I saw it, but it was overshadowed by Mewtwo Union making top 4 by Sander. And that was like a deck that had great matchups into specifically Arceus and Palkia. And that deck was good. But what I found was um, it was like very easy to tech against because it was so known as like a concept. And so I thought for Baltimore, I'd just come off Worlds. I'd played Palkia. I think I'd played like 6 Palkia mirrors in my 8 rounds. I was just done with that deck. I need a break. Let's just play something a little like off the wall and enjoyable. So like, okay, this Miltech deck that I saw in testing when I was like first like gathering info for Worlds, I wrote off because I'm not actually going to play that to Worlds. Like, you know what? Maybe let's give this a try for regionals. And it was working. It was doing well, especially since Arceus Pikachu had just won Worlds. I figured this has like an almost 100-0 Arceus Pikachu in a way that Mewtwo Union didn't. Because so many of the decent Arceus decks had Dark Attackers at the time. So I just figured, all right, this deck is just, it's got its auto losses, it's got its auto wins, it's just got a different spread than Mewtwo Union. Let's just run it and see what happens.
Nice. Yeah. So for our audio listeners, so Miltank is basically like Mimikyu. It couldn't be hit by these. And then Morpeko was is there what's a Pokemon that has that attack? It's kind of like the Ralts, memory skip Ralts, where you could block one of the attacks. And it had like Regilucky to get items back. You had Evil Tall to discard special energy. And a lot of disruption supporters. So okay, so you kind of said like you figured out like this deck could kind of exploit the meta. Is there ever part of you where you're like, no one else is running this, like no one is running it with me, like maybe like this isn't as good as I think, like I'm kind of scared to just send this, or was that you were just like, I'm so confident, like I know this has potential, like let's do it?
It's funny because looking back, I thought like, what was I thinking? How did I end up on this deck? Like I don't know if the Jack of like today, after like a lot more experience in day 2, because this was my first day 2. I never day 2 an event prior to my top 8 with it, and I was a lot more willing to just risk it with decks and just kind of go for bold calls to try to make it to a day 2. But now that like I feel like I could more reliably play kind of any deck in day 2, like if it's a real meta deck, I'd be less likely to make like a bold kind of strange call like this. But like I thought the deck had merits, specifically that like people just wouldn't know how to approach it because no one had played against it. Like what was so like not understood about the deck was that the Morpeko, it was good because of memory skip, specifically because it hit Inteleon for weakness, and so much of the deck was about prize racing, and like have it specifically how this Morpeko would like hit Inteleon for weakness and then like take it out, and it was about energy denial. And it was true during the event. There were some of my opponents just didn't understand like what my deck was trying to do, so they would just waste resources and that I could exploit in a way that like if I played like the Drago Mirror today, both players have an understanding what the game plan is, and they're not going to make reckless mistakes like my opponents may have at the time.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So would you like say like a good advice maybe to people who are maybe like, I don't know if less skilled is the right word, but like people to like take a chance on these kind of like weird decks if like you're trying to break through, or if you're just trying to like have deep runs, like kind of rely on that surprise factor?
Yeah, so if you're like maybe less experienced with like at the highest level of competition, I would actually say avoid these decks because Yeah, honestly, I'll tell you, like beforehand, like before this deck worked, there were several decks that I played at big events that just didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Like they just didn't make sense, you know? And so there was a lot of trial and error involved. So I would say just pick with something like proven and just get as good as you can. Just only play that deck. And I think your best shot of breaking through to a higher level of finish is just being as good as you can with a naturally good deck.
Yeah, I think I agree with that 100%. Like, because if you're playing a good deck, like if you just flip, for example, you're playing Regidrago and your opponent flips over like a tier 2 Pokemon deck, you're just like, okay, well, you're already at an advantage in the tournament, right?
100%.
I used to be someone who would play all these like fun tier 2 decks because I just enjoyed doing that. And then literally last season, I just switched to being a Lugia bot, and all of a sudden it's like day two, day two, day two, day two, top, like making consistent top cuts and all that. So I think I agree with you. I think just get really good with a tier 1 deck if you're trying to break through. Then what did that top 8 kind of do for like your confidence? Maybe do you think that tournament was like a turning point for you as a player, and like because after that you had 4 more day 2s on that season. So was that kind of like a huge launching pad for you, or do you think you were already at a point where you felt like you were like a strong player?
Yeah, it was huge. I think what it did was when I got to day 2, when you play in day 2, your opponents are just better than in
Yep.
day 1. And so when I played all these opponents, I did well because it was like a really polarizing matchup based deck. But like I could even then I could see like I could appreciate how good these players were, and they were trying their best to win these like horrendous matchup, right? Um, and so it made me realize that there is like a higher level of player that I can still reach. Like just because I made top 8, like there's still way more to get to. And my loss in top 8 was to Piper, and I was like, okay, well clearly like I got some work to do because if you just run in circles around me, I can get better. And so I just like kept working, sort of to the level where I did at Worlds, where I would just keep be like working, refining, like playing new decks. And from then on out, I decided like, all right, playing these like kind of off the wall underrated decks is like fun, but like I like winning more. You know, I'm not winning with these decks. I gotta if I want to compete with the top players, I gotta like play the top decks.
Yeah, that makes 100%. I feel like yeah, it's almost like if you try and gimmick, it's like you're almost like admitting to yourself like I'm not at that level
Yeah.
yet. Like I don't feel comfortable enough that I can take out like someone like an Azul or something if I sat across from him in a tournament. So or like a Piper in your case there. So yeah, that's really cool. I think that was an awesome deck to make top 8. I feel like that's one of the decks like that's always gonna be like near and dear to your heart. The Morepeko
Yeah.
Miltank control deck. Uh, Cool. Okay, so yeah, now we kind of have your backstory, which I think is like fantastic. It's really great to see your growth. So I kind of want to focus on this year's Worlds. So you already kind of talked about how you kind of practice for the event. How did you kind of like figure out what the meta game was like, and how did you kind of build your list with like that in mind?
So I think first thing I did was look at NAIC. And when I looked at NAIC, I saw Guardy like completely dominate. I played Lost Box that event and I thought it was good, but afterwards I recognized, okay, like I'm winning these games against Guardy by like the skin of my teeth. This matchup is still really, really close, and this deck is just like Guardy is so naturally good to everything. And so if the NAIC meta stayed the way like it was for Worlds, I would have expected a lot of Guardy. And then I considered, okay, here's this new set. And so I tried Regidrago and I tried Kyurem canceling Cologne. And I was like, oh my god, this smokes Guardy. Like this changes everything. And then when that happened, I started playing all these other decks. Like I started playing Charizard more. I tried it with the Dusknoir. And I'll be honest, I didn't like the deck very much. I thought it was kind of mid. And that it was getting rolled by Regidrago. And so that's when I started. But like, what was important was during that time, Charizard was being hyped up a lot. So I got to thinking like, okay, so whether or not I think this deck is actually good, people are going to play it. And so I can abuse that by knowing what the best deck is, which is in my testing pretty quickly figured out. Regidrago is just like a cut above the rest of these decks. Um, and so I should just play this deck and just take advantage of all of these people who are playing like in comparison mediocre decks. Uh, and part of me thought like, okay, this world, maybe people are going to respect it more. But like at the same time, when we looked at the meta share, people still played a bunch of decks that weren't Regidrago
Yeah.
and weren't like direct hard counters to Regidrago. So even at the highest level, there's still room to optimize your deck choice. Um, and I think this world's like all the people who play Drago, that show, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean Drago had like a super high conversion rate. There's 4 of them in top 8, so I think it definitely like proved itself as the best deck. And I think the thing with Regidrago is it's kind of one of those decks where like even your bad matchups, like you can still win. Like you can still beat Bolt, Miraidon. You literally just like you get a Charizard to stick or something. Um, that's for sure. So okay, so you kind of said you figured out those decks weren't the best. So like for me personally, like I wanted to play Gardevoir and I was like I cannot beat Regidrago. So like I cannot pick this deck. And to your point about there's still room to pick better decks. Like I think Tord, for example, like he figured out Rabasca gives you like a chance against Drago. I think it was still a little cope, but like again, like it goes to show that like deck building is like it really pays off at this kind of level, and deck selection is such a huge thing. I actually saw it. Did you see that tweet today from like Pablo where he was like, oh, deck selection was only like 10% of like doing well in a tournament and all that. What are your What are your thoughts on that actually? Like he said, I think it was like 80% like playing and stuff, but 10% deck selection.
I don't know about the percentage ratio, but I think he's right in that like play is the big deal.
Yeah.
Because like even if a deck is the most popular deck in the room, it's not like different people show up at the top tables with it every single time. You see the same names pop up pretty consistently. So they've got to be doing something right beyond just their deck choice. And it's exactly that. It's the player skill. And it's funny, even when I was playing in day 2, I was playing against some Dragos and I thought like, okay, well, like there's like still player skill here difference, you know. Like I'm getting kind of harassed by these Regie Dragos. They're thinking of things that I'm not thinking of, and that like makes a difference at the highest level too. And so yeah, I think he's 100% right. Player skill is the single most important component of success in Pokemon.
Yeah, I think I agree. I'd say deck selection is probably a little bit more than 10%, but I agree that I think like playing, like you said, playing like the best deck just puts you at an advantage over people. But again, you have to know how to pilot it, know the lines. You're gonna play against other people with like good decks, so that's for sure. So okay, so you kind of came to the conclusion that Drago's the best deck when you were thinking about the meta share. So how'd you kind of come to your 60? So I think Regidrago, like honestly, I'd say around like 55, 56 cards are almost like staple in Regidrago. I think in almost every single build, right?
Yeah.
Like 3/3 Drago, 3 Ogerpon, like you have like Giratina, Mew, Ciaran, whatever. So your techs that you picked, if I just look at your list, you picked not Virizion, Iron Leaves, Spiritomb, and Temple of Sinnoh. I would say are your techs here. So can you kind of like walk me through how you decided on those as your tech cards for the deck?
So I think the biggest one to talk about is Spiritomb.
Yep.
About 2 weeks before, I had a bit of like a crisis of confidence. I didn't have Tomb yet. I didn't have Temple, and I was getting rolled by Snorlax and Lugia. And I had to take a step back. I'm like, okay, one, can I still play Drago? And I was like, yes, I think you can still beat these matchups. Because like without them, without Temple, without Tomb, Lugia's really hard. And
Yep.
Snorlax is like not great either. And so like my first thought was, okay, well, I could just play Tomb. Tomb just the first thought was, okay, I can solve Snorlax right here if I just play Tomb. And I thought people would play Snorlax a little more than they did at Worlds. But what ended up happening was Tomb actually just kind of solved your Lugia matchup if you played it with Temple.
Mm-hmm.
Like it flipped the matchup from like 30-70 to I think like 65-35. I'll be real. Like the whole weekend, my Lugia opponents were getting double chops turn 2, and it just still wasn't enough. Tomb does a few things for you. Like it shuts off their Luminion early game, so sometimes they just break off the gates. Late game, it shuts off their Luminions. They don't just win off of like an Ultra Ball after Iono. Like if they need to like hit the boss, they need specifically boss and not any Ball Surge or the fish. And it shuts off Weird Ear, which came up in one of my games in day 2, because it just limits their options, right? And it also has situational applications into like Zard. You know, they can't Luminion, they can't Rotom. The Temple, the same thing. Temple is for Lugia mainly. It's like for like stall too if they play Miss Energy. But you just want like a stadium bump. The Guardies were talking about neutralization zone, and I just wanted to respect that in some way. Even just against like aggro decks, being able to go like bump stadium and Iono is just good. Just give them one less chance to like weasel their way back into the game or to like find the game winning combo. And the last one was Iron Leaves. This one I'm still a little more suspect on. The Iron Leaves are a Switch, and I moved over from Switch. One, because I felt that my Snorlax was already good with Tomb, so I could get away with one less raw switching card. And I could play Iron Leaves, because Iron Leaves would be nice into aggressive decks like Miraidon and Bolt and Rungoon, which I thought would be a lot more popular leading into this tournament. And we saw they were more popular and they did well. Just because it allows for earlier pressure without committing energy switches. So you can reliably hit first. Like if you go second and you can get like a turn one hit. If they leave a Mew or Squawk active or vulnerable and you can prime it up, you just take the prize lead that you will almost always win with the leaves. And even if you don't kill stuff, leaves does enough damage to combo with Dragapult so that you can still take advantage of it and keep up your prize trade by going hit with leaves, take 4 prizes with Apex Dragon, copy Phantom Dive. I will say the problem with leaves, it's not that good in the mirror. It can be a bit of bait sometimes because it puts another Pokemon in play that can be Ciaran. And I was punished for that over the weekend, where that's like a play you have to worry about in the mirror. And if you go aggressive with leaves, a response could just be Ciaran. And it makes their life way easier if you just give them something that can be Ciaran.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'll start with Spirit Team. Like I also played the card because I was like, oh, like because when I play against Lugia, I'm like, well, like they actually can't kill Regidrago, but like they literally just go like Lumineon, Boss, like Tempest Dive, Ogerpon twice. That was the same as you. I'm like, if you just play Spirit Team, like you Iono them, like you pretty much just win. And the Temple. And yeah, the Leaves is interesting because, like you said, it kind of solves some aggro matchups because, like if you get a hit in, like you said, on something that has less than 240 or less, you can just Dragapult after and like basically take 4 prizes. It's basically taking 2 prizes on that turn.
Yeah.
You just have to clean up later. But one thing, like the reason I didn't play Iron Leaves, one of the reasons was I actually found Drago, like the bench space is very tight. Like if I use Squawk, for example, in a game, I can only bench like one of Mew or Pheasantipity. If I have to bench Hawlucha, if I have to bench Charizard. So I found sometimes like Iron Leaves would kind of like grief a bench spot from me. That was one of the problems I had with it. But like if you played the tournament again, like would you switch that to a Switch, or do you think like Iron Leaves was like good enough that it like carried its weight?
It's funny. I was playing the weekend, and honestly, like I never needed a Switch. So whether or not I'd play Iron Leaves, I'm not sure. But I may just be cut for some other card, maybe like a Gudra or another Iono or something like that.
Yeah.
But like the Iron Leaves was definitely the worst card in the deck. Like I don't think you need the card in there. It's fine, but like it's not going to make the difference most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned Gudra. So I think we saw, at least in top 8, half of them played Gudra, half didn't. So how did you reach the conclusion that you didn't need Gudra in this deck?
So part of it was I was trying to keep the list as like straightforward as possible because I recognized I think the single best attack in your deck is Dragapult. That's why you play 2 copies and you want it early. Space is an issue with Drago. Like it's hard to get those last few spaces. And so I thought, well, how often am I using Gudra? So in a matchup like Guardy, Gudra's nice, but like I already think you're fine. So it's not really something I'm going to invest anything else into. Zard, like I don't use Gudra all too often in the Zard match. It doesn't come off that much. And so that's not something I'm going to invest in. Lugia, I thought I would use it more. Wasn't the end of the world because Lugia's game plan is usually just gusting up stuff on the bench. And so rarely do they target your Dragos, or if they just hit it for 220 or whatever reduction with Gudra, you're just going to win anyways. Gudra would be really nice in Mirror. I think that was where I missed out on it the most. Would have been the Mirror. And I will say that was probably my biggest mistake of the tournament was I didn't understand the mirror maybe as well as I needed to. And if I run it back, maybe I say, okay, Gudra would be important in the mirror. But like you have so many lines you take in the mirror anyways, and Gudra is just one of many. So if you don't have the card, I don't think it's the end of the world. It's just an option depending on the meta. Maybe if you expect a lot of Iron Thorns, Gudra's pretty good there. But I didn't expect Thorns. I played against a few, and some I was able to beat, some I was not. And so I think Gudra is more of like a meta-dependent card versus all the other attackers, which you need in every situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I personally played Gudra because, like you said, I identified in the mirror that it's kind of insane. Because like if you Gudra, like your opponent like needs to gust that turn if they want to do anything. If they just hit into a rolling iron Regidrago, like you kind of just win on the spot. And like yeah, I would find like niche uses for Gudra. Like I'd just be in like random situations where I'm like, oh, Gudra's really good here. But like you said, most of the time Dragapult's just like a better attacker. I personally think I would just play Gudra going forward, just because I think Regidrago's gonna be super popular, and I think Thorns might honestly like be like a 6 to 7% meta share deck going forward as well. Like if you pull off a rolling iron against them, you almost like win on the spot. So
I played Gudra as well. Honestly, like going forward, I won a cup with. I played it a cup recently. There's Gudra on my list. Card's good.
Yeah, no, it's a great card. So okay, so I think one of the takeaways from Worlds was we saw Regie Drago kind of keeps decks like Gardevoir and Charizard at bay, which kind of like opened the door for like Miraidon, for Roaring Moon. What's the other aggro deck? I'm forgetting. Raging Bolt to do well, right? All these decks that are trying to like out trade the Regie Drago. So like, where do you kind of think Regie Drago sits in the meta now? Like, as we're heading forward, like even just the Cups right now, or to like Baltimore.
So I think Drago's in a fine spot still. It's like a little more dangerous than it was at Worlds because so many aggro decks did well. And those are admittedly your toughest matchups. But the thing about Drago is that the deck is so good that those tough matchups are just like a little unfavored.
Yeah.
They're totally winnable, and if you know the lines better than your opponent, I think you're fine, you know? So I would wholeheartedly endorse Drago for Baltimore still. I think the deck's great, and I think I wouldn't be shocked if the deck won it all, and I think it'll be the most well-represented deck, at least in day 2.
Yeah, I mean, one card I was thinking about playing was something like maybe like Cleffa. We saw people playing that. I think against these
Yeah.
aggro decks, like the way you win is you basically force them to take a one prize knockout at some point
Yeah.
in the game, right? And I feel like Cleffa is one of those cards where it kind of lets you like keep pace with your opponent, but it basically sets you up for a super strong turn too. So like, what's your opinion maybe on that card? Is that a card that maybe you think maybe the deck should be looking to play more now, as it kind of maybe helps some of these more aggressive matchups, or do you think just like benching Halucha or Radzard and putting it active turn 1 is like probably enough?
So I can see it like 100%. I didn't have Switch on my list for Worlds, and so one less way to get Cleffa active, so I
Yeah.
kind of discounted that card pretty fast. But if Switch is back in my deck, and you can more reliably get into Cleffa, because that was my big issue. Like if you start Drago or like Kyurem or Radzard, it's gonna be tough to get into Cleffa. I guess if you start Radzard, it's fine because that's a one prize already. Although you'd want the Cleffa for the pivot for the draw. Um, but there's so many more outs to it, and so many ways to get into it. And these aggressive decks are way more popular. I think Cleffa is really valuable, and I'm testing it, and I'm finding it to be super useful. And I wouldn't be surprised if I play Drago for Baltimore, right?
Yeah, I think it's really nice. Like it also has Fear Retreat. It's
Yeah,
honestly like 30 HP. Like it seems like kind of a liability, but like you're like honestly, it's not that big of a liability since like you can just
no.
bench all 2 prizes anyways and kind of get it. Or most decks just don't have a way to snipe besides like Regie Drago or I guess Dragon Bolt. That's not really a deck anymore. Um, so okay, yeah. So kind of building off of that. So like we said, we saw these aggro decks do really well, and I'd say their meta share was actually quite low. So do you think now in Baltimore we're going to see the Roaring Moons, the Miraidons, the Raging Bolts, the Iron Thorns? Like, do you think those decks are going to go up in play? And if they are, like, what decks do you think they're going to take the meta share like away from?
So I think I would say Moon and Miraidon probably. It's a little hard to say with these aggro decks, but I would say Moon and Miraidon probably do see more play. Raging Bolt maybe not as much because I think those aggro decks eat into the percentage of Bolt. And Thorns maybe stays the same. What I think these decks eat into is Lugia's meta percentage. So I would say Lugia goes down, and these decks sort of take their place. Especially since Iron Thorns win Worlds, Lugia doesn't seem like it has a great Thorns matchup. It just seems like a bit of like a worse call, especially since Lugia didn't have the most amazing Worlds run. It did okay, but not like remarkably well.
Yep. Yeah, I got ninth, which is like decent, but like again, I think Lugia like it's always had that problem consistency, and like you said, like Thorns was there, Miraidon, all that. So I do think Lugia we're probably gonna see a decrease in meta share, but honestly, Lugia wasn't that played at Worlds. I think it was like 11 or 10%.
Yeah.
But I think the thing with like Miraidon and like Roaring Moon is like even Raging Bolts, like a lot of players like have played those decks at some point or another. Like obviously in different iterations than they are now, but I think a lot of players are excited like at the prospect of having the chance to go back and like play those decks. Um, so I think that also opens the door maybe for a Charizard or a Gardevoir to start seeing more play or seeing more success. We saw Drago had like 24% meta share at Worlds. I think that's mainly because of the quality of players at Worlds. Like I can't see Drago like being 24% again. I could see it being like maybe 20. But do you think maybe Charizard and Gardevoir are primed for a comeback now? That we are seeing return to some of these more aggressive decks.
Yeah, I mean, I think people can realize, these aggressive decks do have issues with Charizard and Gardevoir. Yeah, I don't see why they wouldn't see more play, or at least they do better than they did at Worlds, where Drago just farmed them. Yeah, no, I think they can 100% take advantage because these aggro decks, like, especially since Baltimore is the first tournament of the year, I think we have a lot of like new players entering the scene. They really would gravitate towards these like more exciting, easy to pick up straightforward decks like a Miraidon or Raging Bolt or Moon, the numbers will be very high. And so Guardy especially, I think, can really capitalize. So I wouldn't be shocked if Guardy has a great tournament run in Baltimore.
Yeah, I think Guardy for me is like up there with Drago. It's like they're both like my two considerations right now. Like I just love playing Gardevoir, and I'm like, okay, like the meta's a bit better. And I'd say like Guardy was hard to play at Worlds because the Regidrago players were so good. So if you play against like maybe like a more average Regidrago player, you could maybe like pick up some more wins that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. And then okay, we saw Thorns win the tournament. So where do you think Thorns kind of sits now? So it actually had like a 6 or 7% meta share at Worlds. It made the graphic. So first question, like in Baltimore, is Thorns going to make the graphic?
I will say, yeah, it's 6th again.
Okay.
Thorns is not going anywhere, but like no one, I don't think anyone is like super excited to play Thorns. No one's like picking up. A lot of the play for Worlds, I think people playing Thorns was just as a meta read, and it was kind of, I don't think there are any Thorns heads out there who are like so excited to play Thorns at every tournament, and they like are masters of the deck and study it. I think almost everyone who played Thorns at Worlds just played it because they thought it was a good spot for the meta. And so some people will probably still play it for that reason, and other people will play it because it won Worlds and is like another accessible deck that you can flip coins. And I know people like flipping coins. So like I don't think it's going anywhere. It's probably not going up. It's probably not going down.
Yeah, I think it'll stick around that 6 to 7% range. So I guess maybe like my next follow-up question for that is, do you think people are gonna tech their decks for Thorns? Like, are decks that like don't traditionally play Cologne, for example, like let's say something like a Bolt or something, are they gonna start playing Cologne, or do you think decks are just gonna like ignore Thorns and be like, I hope I just don't hit that deck?
I think they could haphazardly add text, whether or not it's great sense. Like I wouldn't be shocked to see like a Raging Bolt with a Cologne in its list. Whether or not you should be playing Cologne as Drago or Raging Bolt, who knows? But I think people will try to tech for it in whatever like weird way they can, just to have something to say that they respect Thorns.
Yeah.
But like on the whole, I don't think Thorns' tournament is going to be decided by people like over teching for it or the meta being really hostile to it. I think people are just going to more or less ignore it or just like play those weird techs.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like it's one of those problems when you deck build, right? Like whenever you want to add a tech to your deck, like you have to be like, okay, what's the opportunity cost? Like what card am I taking out?
Yeah.
Like am I taking out a consistency card that helps me in like the 90% of other matchups? It's like I don't know, a lot of the decks like Cologne or Flutter, for example, like if you put them in a lot of the decks, like they have very narrow applications. It's normally just against Thorns. So like I honestly feel like your expected value or your win percentage is probably higher if you just play a consistency card that's probably like good across like all your matchups instead of just like hard teching for Thorns. And like a lot of decks can just like beat Thorns by high rolling. Like Regidrago, like if you just get turn 1 Squawk or if you just like draw Cologne like within the first few turns, like you can actually normally just like run them over. So I don't think people are gonna like play too many techs for Thorns, and I would probably advise against like teching like heavily for Thorns. I'd rather just play a better deck, like more or better list. Sorry. So, okay, cool. We kind of briefly mentioned, you said that Snorlax kind of flopped at Worlds. I think that was surprising for a lot of people because I think going in, Snorlax was really hyped. I know Azul and his group played Snorlax. So first off, like, why do you think maybe Snorlax had a tough Worlds? And then following on that, like, do you think Snorlax is going to rebound, or are people just going to take like Thorns as like the new control deck?
Yeah, I was a little surprised to see Snorlax flop. You know, because good players like Azul picked up on that, and they make good decisions usually when it comes to their meta reads. It could be that some of the players that were going to play Snorlax, I talked to a few of them, and they just switched to Thorns. I think part of it is at Worlds, the caliber of player is high enough to where, like in close matchups, where Snorlax maybe could just outmaneuver like a less experienced opponent, they're just not going to have that ability to a Worlds. So they're gonna like they don't have the ability to kind of squeeze out free wins in like a matchup that maybe like a really experienced player would be able to navigate correctly. Um, and that's probably why I didn't do as well too well at Worlds. It wasn't like a ton of top players playing it, and just everyone was more prepared for it. But at Baltimore, I wouldn't be shocked to see Snorlax do well. Some issues like the Roaring Mood matchup sounds not good. Dex can just tech for it in a way that like is more natural than Ironthorn's teching. So like Drago still has Cologne, and just Drago naturally has like a get 2 cards back to like buy 2 switching turns. And there are decks that are just naturally great into it, like Lugia. But I wouldn't be surprised if Snorlax makes like a deep run, or if some savvy players pick up on it and just get the read just right with the text to go into Snorlax. I think there's a spot for it in meta still, this format.
Yeah, I mean, we just discussed that like we think Lugia's gonna go down and play a little bit, so that's one of your worst matchups, like kind of like falling off a little bit. So I agree with you. I think Snorlax is like I'm actually gonna say I think one Snorlax will make top 8 of Baltimore. I just think, like you said, like it's a lot easier to play control into like a softer field. And even against good players, like you can just win. Like you hit your flutes, you hit your Misfortune Sisters, your Aries at the right time. So I definitely think Snorlax is like due for a bounce back, even if its meta share percentage is going to be like 2 or 3%. And yeah, it seems like also like Pidgeot control is kind of just like done now. Everyone's just like, all right, we're just playing Snorlax or Thorns if we're going to play control. Because yeah, it does feel like Drago kind of just destroys that deck, which is annoying. So okay, cool. I guess maybe my last question here on the Drago front is, what are some techs maybe, or like would you play the same list that you played at Worlds, or like if you go to Baltimore, like what are some cards you're considering? So we kind of talked about Cleffa earlier, taking out like Iron Leaves for Gudra. Are those things you were thinking maybe like retroactive for Worlds, or are those things you're thinking of for Baltimore?
So I'd say for Baltimore, there's a few cards I'd consider, like the Cleffa one, the Gudra as well, like Iron Leaves for Switch probably. You probably don't need Tomb if Lugia is not as popular, or if you don't think Snorlax is going to make that deep run, or you don't think it's going to be popular enough for you to see it reliably. You could probably lose the Tomb. It's not very good into other matchups. So Cleffa could come in, Gudra could come in. Another card I think is important that I saw a few people play this split that wasn't universal, but I like after playing it some more, is Cutting Research for Iono. And with the effect that has, late game, you against decks like Charizard and Guardy, you want to draw into Research because you are the aggressive one that in those last turns need to find those combos. So often on Fair Stamp, you'd rather hit Research than Iono because you're not going to draw as many off of Iono. But into aggro stuff like Miraidon, Bolt, and Moon, you need to come back often with an Iono combo of your own. And so having more access to Ionos or the ability to chain it could make all the difference at this tournament where aggro decks are so much more popular and mainstream. So I think a third Iono could be like a solid, underrated inclusion in Drago.
Yeah, I think we saw a lot of players, yourself included. You played like the 4 Research 2/2 Iono boss split. Do you think that was like a little greedy, or do you think it was like fine? You're like, I just needed like the tech spaces like from like those.
It is a bit greedy. Like if you could, you would want maybe third boss or third Iono, at least one of them. But the issue with Drago is just space, and you use so many good cards that you want to play in that deck, and you can't fit all of them. So the choices have to be made somewhere. I think most people decided they could get away with like the bare bones 4-2-2 line. But I think if you could add any amount of supporters to the count, you would see the benefits of those supporters.
Yeah, I played 3 Iono Worlds, 3 Iono 2 boss, because I was just like similar to you. I'm like a lot of the matchups like you just want to come back, or even against stuff like Gardevoir, it's like you're consistently taking out Curlies, so you're just like, okay, like if you get one to stick, you kind of just win eventually, which I thought was really nice. Then would you maybe keep playing Temple if you think Lugia is going to go down? So if you take Spiritomb out, would you switch Temple to like another stadium, like maybe like the Jamming Tower, like a Pokestop?
I could see it. So the question is how much, like, I guess you wonder how much Lugia falls off. Like, if Lugia is completely gone, then there's very little reason to play Temple. But if there's some amount of Lugia, then maybe you still want the Temple. I like the idea of having Pokestop in theory is a great stadium because of consistency. But what I like is having a stadium bump for these aggro matchups. And like you can't bump Pokestop with Pokestop. So you gotta have something else. And there isn't much else. Jamming Tower's okay, but like it's not amazing. And I find it like doesn't make a massive, massive difference in the Guardian matchup where you can just win with a Cure and play anyways. So I would say either play Temple or you either don't play a stadium. Maybe Pokestop. But like I probably wouldn't play Jamming Tower.
So you think it's probably just fine, just to lose neutralization zone. Like honestly, like I think like maybe I was looking like 20% of Guardians were playing that card like online. So if Guardian's like 10% of the meta, that means like 2% of people are playing that card. If you hit one of them, like it's kind of just bad luck, right?
Yeah, I think you can deal with it. I honestly would not expect a Guardian list to have neutralization zone. Like, I think that number is going to be so low when Baltimore actually hits, and some of the neutralization zone hype online is just people trying it, and they're going to chicken out and play like unfair stamp.
Yeah, because unfair stamp, like neutralization, is good against Drago, but it's just like kind of useless against most of the other decks. I actually played against one at Worlds. Like I played a game as Guardy where it's like I had to like turn 2 V-Star to stabilize, and like I'm like, okay, I'm chilling, and the guy dropped it on me because I discarded my temple like earlier with the like V-Star power, and I'm like, oh, this is fine. Like I'm at like 2 prizes or something. I can just like Dragapult twice and just knock out random stuff. And the guy went like memory skip roll to Bravery Charm, memory skip, and I'm like, I don't have enough switching left to finish the game. It was funny. So I was like, that was like a very unique deck build. So
yeah,
I mean, like it does work against Drago, but like, you can honestly win like getting through it because your opponent like doesn't play a way to search it, so like they have to find it right away. And if they don't know you don't play Stadium, like they're probably not just gonna like put it down right away. They're gonna want to wait until they Iona you or something. So
yeah,
and they have to.
It sounds worse than it is.
So
yeah,
like it's still winnable. Obviously not ideal, but still winnable for you. Cool. And actually, the last thing I wanted to ask about your list is you played 2 Superior, 1 Stretcher. I think a lot of people were playing. I saw Double Rod. Some people played like 1-1-1. How do you feel about that split on the recovery cards?
I am not sold on that split yet, and I will keep working. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out a best split, and I couldn't really figure it out before Worlds. So I just said, you know what, I like Superior, and Stretcher's good. Rod maybe felt like the weakest piece, but as I played through the tournament, I still thought like, okay, yeah, I can see why I'd want Rod here over second retrieval. Like each card does something the other card doesn't. Night Stretcher is good for immediate access. Superior gets you immediate access to energies. Super Rod means you can conserve stuff even if you need to like research away that hand, right? You still keep those cards. I would lean towards the 1-1-1 split. I think each card has its own merit, and there's a good reason for all of them to exist in the deck, especially since you can recover them with Drago. So just having the diversity of options is like really beneficial for your deck.
Yeah, I played the 1-1-1 split, and it's kind of weird because like all of them are like better at different times of the game. So like sometimes I would draw Superior like on my opening hand. I'm like, okay, well this sucks. Or then like you draw like late in the game, you're like, yeah, I really want Super Rod now, but like I only have Stretcher. So I agree with you because I think sometimes like you can afford to like V-Star power for one of them. And normally like even like sometimes I felt like I just need 1 recovery card to get to the game. And it kind of felt like Super Rod kind of did what Superior did well enough, especially when you play 4 Vessel. I'm like, it's not like super hard to draw like the combo together. And then Stretcher is like one of those cards where I'm like, it's just like it felt really good like turn 2 a lot of times, like just pulling out like a V-Star from my deck or something, or from my discard or something. So I'm like with you, like I'm not sure what the right split is because like you said, each of the cards really feels like you use them at certain times. So, like this card feels really good. Like Superior is also like it lets you discard your dragons, which is like a really important part of the deck.
Yep.
So yeah, great. Well, Jack, I think that's pretty much all the questions I had for you. Is there any topics we didn't discuss that you wanted to bring up, or are we good?
No, I think you pretty much covered it.
Nice.
Baltimore's coming up, and it'll be a super interesting tournament to look at. And I still think people should just play Drago.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Drago's probably the safest play for the tournament if you're a good Drago player.
Yeah.
So hopefully Jack convinced you. Jack, I think our talk today was like super insightful. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with all of our listeners. Before I let you go, plug yourself, hype yourself up, shout out anything you want to shout out.
No problem. So you can find me on Twitter at JackMoorePTCG. Shout out to everyone who supported me, especially at Worlds this year. The local community in Ottawa, you guys are the best. And anyone else who helped me out with testing. And shout out to the Shift Gear for having me on.
Nice, very wholesome. I appreciate that, man. Well, yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. Let us know if you went to Worlds, what deck you played. If you're going to Baltimore, what deck you are thinking of playing. And Aneil should be back next week. But I think our guest this week filled in very nicely for Aneil. So thanks for watching, everyone, and we will catch you next week.